There's a moment in every man's life when he has to choose. Not between good and bad, but between two things he loves, two things he needs, two things that seem impossible to give up. This is the story of a man who faced that exact moment. And his choice will haunt you. His name was James Ashford. He was 48 years old. He had built a technology empire worth $24 billion. James owned everything. James had power. James had influence. James had built something that would outlast him, something that would make him immortal. But James also had something else. A woman named Sarah Chen who loved him completely and asked for nothing except his presence. For 5 years, James had balanced both. James had built his empire while loving Sarah. James had made billions while coming home to her every night. James had achieved the impossible. He had both the empire and the woman. Until the phone rang. That phone call changed everything. That phone call forced James to make a choice he never thought he'd have to make. That phone call revealed that everything he had built was about to collapse. And in that moment, James had to decide. Would he save the $24 billion empire that had taken 25 years to build? Or would he stay with the woman who had taken 5 years to love him back? His decision was already made. James had already decided what he would choose. James knew exactly what he was going to do. But then the phone rang again. And everything changed. This is the story of what happened when James Ashford was forced to choose. This is the story of what it costs to save an empire. This is the story of what it costs to lose love. This is the story of a man who had to learn that some things, once lost, can never be rebuilt. Let's begin. James Ashford built his first company when he was 23 years old. He was working as a software engineer at a large tech company, making good money, living a comfortable life. But James wanted more. James quit his job. James maxed out his credit cards. James borrowed money from his parents. James rented a small office space. James hired 2 other engineers. And James built a company. The company failed. The company burned through all of James's money and all of his investors' money. James lost everything. James declared bankruptcy at 25 years old. But James didn't give up. James got another job. James worked 60-hour weeks. James saved every penny. James paid back his debts. And 5 years later, James tried again. His second company was successful. His second company grew to $100 million in revenue. James sold that company for $200 million when he was 32 years old. James reinvested that money. James started his third company. His third company became worth $2 billion. James sold it for $3 billion when he was 38 years old. And then James started his fourth company. This company was going to be his legacy. This company was going to be the company that made him a household name. This company was going to be worth more than $20 billion. James worked obsessively. James lived in his office. James slept 4 hours per night. James went through a divorce because his wife said that James loved his company more than he loved her. His wife was right. By age 48, James had built a $24 billion empire. James was one of the richest men in the world. James had achieved everything that he had set out to achieve. But James was also completely, utterly alone. James met Sarah Chen at a hospital. James had suffered a heart attack. James was 47 years old and his body was telling him that he had pushed it too far. James was hospitalized for a week. James spent that week in a hospital bed, thinking about death, thinking about what he had accomplished, thinking about what he had lost. Sarah was his nurse. Sarah was 38 years old. Sarah had been a nurse for 12 years. Sarah made approximately $70,000 per year. Sarah was single. Sarah had never been married. Sarah had dedicated her life to caring for people. Sarah came into James's room and she sat with him. Sarah didn't know who James was. Sarah didn't know that he was a billionaire. Sarah just saw a man who was suffering, and she wanted to help. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. "Empty," James said. "I feel completely empty." Sarah sat with James for hours. Sarah listened as James talked about his life. Sarah listened as James talked about building his empire. Sarah listened as James talked about sacrificing everything. His marriage, his relationships, his health, to build something that would outlast him. Do you have anyone? Sarah asked. Do you have people who love you? James thought about this question for a long time. No, James said. I don't. I have employees. I have business partners. I have people who work for me. But I don't have anyone who loves me. I don't have anyone who cares about me as a person. Sarah reached over and she took James's hand. Sarah said something that changed everything. You do now. After James was released from the hospital, he asked Sarah if he could take her to dinner to thank her. Sarah said yes. Over dinner, James learned about Sarah's life. Sarah was from a modest background. Sarah had put herself through nursing school. Sarah worked long hours at a public hospital helping people who couldn't afford good medical care. Sarah had dedicated her life to service. James offered to pay off Sarah's student loans. Sarah said no. Sarah said that if James paid her debts, she would feel indebted to him. Sarah said that she wanted to be with James because she chose to be, not because she owed him something. James had never met anyone like Sarah before. James had never met anyone who didn't want his money. Everyone in James's life wanted something from him. But Sarah just wanted him. Over the next year, James fell in love with Sarah. And in falling in love with Sarah, James discovered something that he had never discovered before. Happiness. Sarah made James slow down. Sarah made James cook dinner with her instead of working. Sarah made James take weekends off. Sarah made James realize that there were things in life more important than building an empire. James proposed to Sarah 2 years after they met. Sarah said yes. James and Sarah got married in a small ceremony with 50 people. The wedding was simple. The reception was at a restaurant near the hospital where Sarah worked. It was the happiest day of James's life. For 5 years, James balanced both. James continued to build his empire, but he also came home to Sarah every night. James worked obsessively during the day, but he was present with Sarah in the evenings and on weekends. James had finally found a way to have both, the empire and the woman. James's colleagues were amazed. They said, "You've changed. You used to live for the company. Now you come home at a reasonable hour. Now you take vacations. Now you care about something other than revenue and profit." James said, "I finally understand what actually matters. I finally understand that building an empire is meaningless if you don't have anyone to share it with." Sarah made James a better person. Sarah made James a better businessman. James's company actually performed better during the 5 years he was with Sarah because James was happier, healthier, more balanced. For 5 years, James proved that you could have both, success and love. James proved that you didn't have to sacrifice one for the other. Until the phone rang. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. James was at home with Sarah. They were having breakfast together. They were talking about their plans for the weekend. They were happy. James's phone rang. James looked at the caller ID. It was his CEO. His CEO never called him at home. James felt something wrong. "James," his CEO said, "we have a problem. A very serious problem." James listened as his CEO explained the situation. James's company had been investing in emerging markets. One of those markets was collapsing. One of James's key investments was about to go bad. A company that James's company had invested $6 billion in was about to declare bankruptcy. If that company declared bankruptcy, James's company would lose $6 billion. James's company would have to write off that loss. James's company's stock price would plummet. James's company would face shareholder lawsuits. James's company could potentially collapse entirely. What do you recommend? James asked. "We need you here," his CEO said. "We need you to come to the office immediately. We need you to make a decision about how to handle this. We need you to lead. The company needs you." James looked at Sarah. Sarah was looking at him. Sarah already knew what was coming. I'll be there in 30 minutes, James said. James got dressed. James got ready to leave. But before he left, Sarah said, "Don't go." James was shocked. "What do you mean, don't go?" "I mean," Sarah said, "don't go to the office. Don't save the company. Stay here with me." "Sarah," James said, "the company is about to collapse. I have to go." "No," Sarah said. "You don't. You have a choice. And I'm asking you to choose me. I'm asking you to choose us. I'm asking you to let the company fall and stay here with me." James looked at Sarah. James wanted to stay. But James also understood what was at stake. James understood that if the company collapsed, thousands of people would lose their jobs. James understood that if the company collapsed, he would lose everything he had spent 25 years building. "I'll be back soon," James said. "I just need to handle this crisis and I'll be back." "If you leave," Sarah said, "I can't guarantee that I'll be here when you get back." James froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Sarah said, "that I can't compete with your company anymore. I can't be with someone who abandons me in a crisis because he has to save his empire. I can't be the woman who comes second to a business. I love you, James. But I love myself more. And if you choose the company over me, then I have to choose myself." James understood what Sarah was saying. James understood that Sarah was giving him an ultimatum. Choose her or choose the company. James understood that he couldn't have both. And James made his decision. James had already decided what he was going to do. James said, "Sarah, I love you. But I have to save the company. There are thousands of people depending on me. I can't let them down." "Then we're done," Sarah said simply. "I'll be packed by the time you get back tonight." James left for the office. James spent the next 12 hours fighting to save his company. James convinced the board to invest another $3 billion to stabilize the situation. James worked out a deal to restructure the investment. James did what he had to do to save the company. At 9 p.m., James came home. The apartment was empty. Sarah was gone. She had left a note. "I hope it was worth it." James saved the company. James's quick thinking and decisive action prevented the company from collapsing. James's company lost $6 billion, but it survived. But James lost everything that actually mattered. For the next 3 months, James tried to get Sarah back. James called her. Sarah didn't answer. James sent her messages. Sarah didn't respond. James went to the hospital where she worked. Sarah's colleagues told him that she had requested a transfer to a different hospital in a different city. Sarah had left. Sarah had disappeared from James's life. And in losing Sarah, James understood something that he should have understood before. The company didn't matter. The empire didn't matter. The $24 billion didn't matter. None of it mattered without Sarah. James tried to work, but he couldn't focus. James tried to lead his company, but his heart wasn't in it. James had built the empire for 25 years and he had been willing to sacrifice Sarah to save it. But now that Sarah was gone, the empire felt empty. James's colleagues noticed the change. They said, "You're different. You used to be obsessed with the company. Now you seem like you don't care." James said, "I don't care. I don't care about any of this. I care about Sarah." 6 months after Sarah left, James made a shocking announcement. James announced that he was stepping down as CEO of his company. James announced that he was going to sell significant portions of his stake in the company to invest the money in Sarah's dream. Sarah's dream was to build a network of free clinics for uninsured patients. Sarah had always wanted to do this, but she didn't have the money. James had the money. James had $24 billion. James sold $15 billion worth of his company stock. James invested that money in Sarah's project. James founded the Sarah Chen Foundation. The foundation would build free clinics across the country. Then James did something even more shocking. James tried to find Sarah. James hired a private investigator. The private investigator found Sarah. Sarah was living in Seattle. Sarah was working at a public hospital. Sarah was still alone. James flew to Seattle. James went to the hospital where Sarah worked. James asked to see her. Sarah agreed to meet with him, but only in the hospital's cafe during her lunch break. James sat across from Sarah. Sarah looked different. Sarah looked older. Sarah looked tired. Sarah looked like someone who had given up on love. "I sold the company," James said. "Not completely. But I sold enough to fund your dream. I founded the Sarah Chen Foundation. I've invested $15 billion in building free clinics. I want to do this with you." Sarah looked at James. "Why?" "Because," James said, "I chose the company over you. I chose the empire over the woman I love. And in doing that, I lost everything that actually mattered. And I spent 6 months regretting that choice every single day." "It's too late," Sarah said. "You had your chance. You had 5 years with me. You had the choice. And you chose the company." "I know," James said. "I know it's too late. I know I can't undo what I did. But I'm asking for another chance. I'm asking you to build this foundation with me. I'm asking you to let me spend my life making up for what I did." Sarah was silent. Sarah looked at James for a long time. "James," Sarah said, "I can't be with you. I can't go back. Too much has changed. I've changed. You've changed. The moment has passed." "But the foundation," James said. "The foundation is your dream. The foundation is the work you've always wanted to do. Let me help you do this." "No," Sarah said. "I'll do this on my own. I don't need your money. I don't need you. I've learned to live without you. I've learned to be happy on my own." And Sarah left. Sarah finished her lunch break and she went back to work. And James sat alone in the hospital cafe, understanding finally what it meant to lose everything. James never married again. James understood with perfect clarity that he had lost his one chance at real love. James understood that Sarah was irreplaceable. James understood that no other woman would ever love him the way Sarah had loved him. James continued to fund the Sarah Chen Foundation, but from a distance. James gave the foundation billions of dollars over the years, but he never asked for recognition. James never attended the foundation's galas. James never had his name put on buildings. James never asked for Sarah's gratitude. James knew that gratitude was not what he deserved. James knew that gratitude was not what he needed. What James needed was Sarah. And Sarah would never be his again. But James also understood something important. Funding the foundation was his way of honoring what Sarah had built. Funding the foundation was James's way of showing the world that he understood what actually mattered. Funding the foundation was James's way of saying, without words, that he was sorry. The Sarah Chen Foundation grew into something extraordinary. The foundation started small. The foundation built its first free clinic in Los Angeles in a poor neighborhood where people couldn't afford medical care. The clinic served 500 patients in its first year. But as years went by, the foundation grew. The foundation built its second clinic in New York. Then Chicago. Then Houston. Then Miami. The foundation expanded across the country. By the time James was 60 years old, the Sarah Chen Foundation had built 120 free clinics across the United States. 120 places where people could get medical care regardless of their ability to pay. The foundation served over 2 million patients per year. The foundation helped people who were suffering. The foundation saved lives. The foundation was Sarah's legacy. And James funded it. James gave the foundation billions of dollars. James gave anonymously. James never wanted credit. James never wanted recognition. What people didn't understand about James's situation was that even though he had saved the company, he had actually destroyed it. James had saved the company from the immediate crisis. But in saving it, James had revealed something fundamental about himself. He would always choose the company over people. He would always choose business over love. He would always choose money over relationships. And once that became clear, James could no longer lead the company effectively. His employees knew that James didn't really care about them. His employees knew that James would sacrifice them without hesitation if it meant saving the company. His employees knew that working for James meant being disposable. The best employees started to leave. The most talented people, the creative people, the people who drove innovation, they all started to leave. Within 2 years of saving the company from its crisis, James's company had lost 40% of its key talent. The company was still profitable. The company was still valuable. But the company had lost something fundamental. It had lost the people who actually made it special. James's company became a large, profitable machine. But it lost its soul. Meanwhile, Sarah's foundation, the organization that James had been funding, was becoming something magical. The foundation was attracting talented nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers who wanted to make a difference. The foundation was attracting people who didn't care about money. The foundation was attracting people who cared about service. Sarah's foundation became the most innovative healthcare organization in the country. Sarah's foundation became the standard that other healthcare organizations tried to match. Sarah's foundation became a beacon of what healthcare could be when people prioritized service over profit. And Sarah built it without James. Sarah built it alone, using her skills, her vision, her passion. 10 years after Sarah left, James was 58 years old. James had completely stepped down from his company. James had sold his remaining stake. James had given away most of his fortune to charity. James kept approximately $500 million for himself, enough to live very comfortably, but a fraction of the $24 billion he had once had. James lived in a modest penthouse in Manhattan. James spent his days volunteering at one of the Sarah Chen Foundation clinics. James worked without pay, helping patients, doing administrative work, whatever was needed. James never saw Sarah. Sarah was still running the foundation, but she worked in the Seattle clinic most of the time. When James worked at clinics in New York, Sarah worked in clinics in other states. But James felt Sarah's presence everywhere. James saw Sarah's vision in every clinic. James saw Sarah's compassion in how the staff treated patients. James saw Sarah's legacy in the lives that were being saved. James sometimes wondered if Sarah knew that he was funding the foundation. James sometimes wondered if Sarah had figured out that the man who was anonymously giving billions of dollars to her foundation was the man who had chosen his company over her. One day, James decided to find out. James flew to Seattle. James went to the clinic where Sarah worked. James asked to see her. The receptionist said, "I'm sorry, Sarah is with a patient. Can you wait?" James waited for 3 hours. Finally, Sarah came out of a patient room. Sarah saw James and her entire body went rigid. Sarah's face went pale. Sarah looked like she had seen a ghost. "James," Sarah said, "what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," James said. "I needed to tell you something." "I don't want to hear it," Sarah said immediately. "James, I don't want you here. This is my workplace. This is my foundation. I don't want you here." "I fund this foundation," James said quietly. "I've been funding it for 10 years. I've given billions of dollars to your dream. I just wanted you to know." Sarah's face changed. Sarah's expression went from anger to something more complicated. Sarah sat down in a nearby chair. "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because," James said, "I chose the company over you. And I spent 10 years understanding the mistake I made. I spent 10 years understanding that the company didn't matter. And I couldn't fix what I had broken with you. But I could help you build your dream. And that was the only way I knew how to say I'm sorry." Sarah was silent. Sarah looked at James for a long time. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said finally. "I've known for 8 years. I've known that you were funding the foundation. I figured it out because I know you. I know the way you think. I know your pattern of trying to buy redemption instead of actually changing." James felt his heart break again. "But," Sarah continued, "I decided to take your money anyway. Because this foundation is helping people. This foundation is saving lives. And I wasn't going to let my anger at you prevent me from doing that work." "Sarah," James said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for choosing the company. I'm sorry for leaving that morning. I'm sorry for everything." "I know you're sorry," Sarah said. "But sorry doesn't fix what broke. Sorry doesn't give me back the 5 years we had. Sorry doesn't make me trust you again. And sorry doesn't change the fact that you chose wrong. I know, James said. I know that sorry isn't enough. I know that I can never fix this. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost. I understand what actually matters. Sarah stood up. James, I'm glad you understand. I'm glad you've learned your lesson. But I can't have this conversation. This foundation is my life now. And you are part of my past. I need to keep them separate. And Sarah walked away. Sarah went back to her patients. And James was alone again. James spent that night in his hotel room in Seattle, thinking about what Sarah had said. I've known for 8 years. I've known that you were funding the foundation. This realization hit James hard. Sarah had known. Sarah had accepted his money even though she knew it was from James. Sarah had built something beautiful using James's money. But Sarah had never once thanked him. Sarah had never once acknowledged him. Sarah had taken his billions and used them to do her work, without giving James credit, without giving James recognition, without giving James anything in return. And James realized that this was the most perfect punishment. This was Sarah telling James exactly what she thought of him. His money was useful, but he was not. James had spent 10 years funding the foundation because he thought that eventually, Sarah would forgive him. James had spent 10 years thinking that if he just gave enough money, if he just did enough good works, eventually Sarah would take him back. But Sarah didn't want him back. Sarah didn't want his redemption. Sarah just wanted him to go away and let her do her work. James is now 63 years old. James has given away nearly $20 billion. James has kept just enough to live comfortably. James has become one of the most generous philanthropists in the world, though almost nobody knows who he is. James has funded hospitals, schools, housing programs, and food banks. James has touched millions of lives. James has made a genuine difference in the world. But James would trade it all back if it meant he could have Sarah again. James sometimes thinks about that Tuesday morning breakfast. James sometimes remembers exactly how Sarah looked when she said, "Don't go. Choose me." James sometimes thinks about what would have happened if he had made a different choice. James imagines a life where he had stayed with Sarah. James imagines a life where he had let the company collapse. James imagines a life where the two of them had built the foundation together. James imagines a completely different ending. But that's not the life James lived. James lived the life where he chose the company. And now, 15 years later, James is living with the consequences. Here's what James understands now that he didn't understand when he was 48 years old. The crisis on that Tuesday morning wasn't actually a crisis. The company could have survived without James's intervention. The company would have lost money. The company would have struggled. But the company would have survived. And even if the company had collapsed completely, that would have been okay. That would have been fine. Because a company can be rebuilt. An empire can be reconstructed. But love cannot be rebuilt once it's destroyed. James had a woman who loved him completely. James had a woman who asked him to choose her. James had one moment, one single moment to make the right choice. And James made the wrong choice. And now, 15 years later, James understands that no amount of money, no amount of charity, no amount of good works can fix that mistake. So here's what I want you to understand. The phone will ring. The crisis will come. The choice will appear. You will face a moment where you have to choose between your ambitions and the person you love. You will face a moment where you have to choose between your dreams and the life you have built with someone. And in that moment, remember James. Remember that James chose the ambition. Remember that James chose the career. Remember that James chose the money. And remember that James spent the rest of his life regretting that choice. When the phone rings, don't answer it. When the crisis comes, let someone else handle it. When the choice appears, choose the person. Choose love. Choose the life that actually matters. Because the crisis will pass. The company will survive. The money will still be there. But the person you love might not be. The person you love might leave. The person you love might find someone else. The person you love might build a life without you. And then you will spend the rest of your life thinking about the moment when you had to choose. And you will wish with every fiber of your being that you had chosen differently. Don't be James. Don't spend your life funding foundations in the name of a woman you've lost. Don't spend your life living with the knowledge that you had one chance to do the right thing and you didn't take it. When it matters, choose love. Choose the person. Choose the life. Because in the end, that's all that matters. That's all that you will remember. That's all that will have been worth it. The empire will crumble. The money will be spent. The company will be forgotten. But the person you loved, the person you had the chance to choose, that person will haunt you forever. Choose wisely. Choose love. Choose what actually matters. I'll see you next time.